Welcome to Earth Speed. So sourdough became a gargantuan quarantine trend. But today we're joined by Karl Smedt, who's taken sourdough enthusiasm to a whole new level. He is the curator of the Sourdough Library in Belgium. Huh? The Sourdough Library? How cool! An archive of some of the most unique and ancient sourdough mothers sourced from kitchens around the world. Karl guides us through the science of fermentation, the health benefits of sourdough bread, and the careful preservation of this precious history. In this conversation, we uncover the vast diversity of sourdough, each with its unique microbial identity, like fingerprints, revealing insights into the heritage of our ancestors, as well as being a key to a deeper relationship to nature and to health. Sourdough is more than bread. It's a symbol of our interdependence with the earth and a lifeline reaching back to our ancestral past. I can't tell which Earth Speed category you fall under. Is it Recipes? Is it Friends and Mentor? Like all the things, because he has a very special offer and he's come all the way to Texas to share something I've never heard of. He has a sourdough library, a library of sourdough. Now, what is a sourdough library?
Well, the Sourdough Library is a physical place in Belgium where we store sourdoughs that we collect from all over the world. So far we have 145 samples, physical samples of sourdough. It's a non-for-profit initiative of Puratos, our company, and we do three things in the library. We preserve the biodiversity of sourdough, we protect the baking heritage, and by having a physical sample of the mothers, we also have a backup for the owners in case something would go wrong with their mother. We can send back a piece of that sourdough.
Okay, so you've said a lot, and I think we need to just go piece by piece and unpack it, because you said a lot of things that I don't know if the audience understands. You said mothers, like what does that mean? What's a mother?
Okay, well, a mother dough. In English, we say that we use the word sourdough, but if you go to Spanish, it is masa madre. Mother dough.
Mother
and that
dough.
comes from the past when a mother or when a daughter was going to get married, she received a piece of the mother dough to take care of her family, because for more than 5,000 years, sourdough has been the only way to make leavened bread. Long before the commercial yeast made its introduction in the market, which was in 1867. So before that, every baker on earth, or every mother on earth, or every person on earth who was making bread was using sourdough. So it is the mother dough. It's a dough from which you take a piece to add to the final dough. And what you take from the mother, you give back with, in 99% of the cases, is water and flour. So you feed the mother back with the flour and the water so that she grows back for the next bake.
Right. So the mother births the next generation
Always.
Of sourdough. Okay, so understand this. Sourdough is what? Because why would you have more than one? It feels like sourdough, right?
Oof. Well,
these are all different.
These are all different because they come from different bakeries, different countries, different regions, different kind of flours. So compare it with milk. With cheese, actually, not milk itself, but the cheese, you have the basic ingredient to make cheese is milk, but how many varieties of cheese are there? You have the soft cheese, the white cheese, the four type with the mold inside, and they're all coming from the same ingredient. Wine, it's grape juice, but there is so much variety in wine. With sourdough, which is a fermented product.
Fermented.
Fermentation is the key word in this case.
So when something's fermented, it's using yeast.
And in the case of sourdough, you have yeast and lactic acid bacteria.
So the yeast from different regions around the world make it special? Is that what happens? Or are you adding specific yeast?
We cannot explain exactly, because for a couple of years there was being thought that in the Bay of San Francisco you have a very specific lactic acid bacteria in the air that works in a nice mutual way, or a symbiosis, to say, with the yeast. And that would make the San Francisco sourdough outstanding and unique. But we have seen, I have 40 sourdoughs from Italy, and in these sourdoughs we found also that lactic acid bacteria that you find in the Bay of San Francisco. And we found that back in 80% of the sourdoughs in the library harbor that lactic acid bacteria. But it was isolated for the first time out of a sourdough in San Francisco. That's why it got the name Lactobacillus sanfranciscensis. But what we...
Originally, when it was discovered,
when it was
got
for the
name.
first time discovered, isolated and identified.
Okay.
They called it San Franciscensis because they found it there. Although that some Germans might say, no, we found that same one years before, somewhere in 58, but they didn't, the identification method was not as accurate, so the San Franciscensis finally made it.
Okay. So so each one of these, they're called mothers, but they're really unique fermented sourdough cultures.
Yes, so what we see when we get a sourdough that we accept in the library, we send it to a university in Italy to our partner, Professor Marco Gobetti. He's one of the top microbiologists when it comes to sourdough and cheese, actually. And so in his lab, they are going to dilute the sourdough, and then they inoculate these Petri dishes that have different substrates to promote the growth of yeast and the growth of lactic acid bacteria. That process takes about 45 working days, so 3 months, and every week the girls in the lab or the guys in the lab, they check the growth of the colonies, and then they see at the shape of the colony of the lactic acid bacteria or the yeast, for instance, oh, this is a different colony than that one. And then they isolate it and they inoculate a new Petri dish. And so after 45 days, we have a pile of, like this, of Petri dishes. And then at the end, we are capable of isolating each and every microorganism. And then through DNA sequencing, we are able to identify them. And as such, we have already more than 1,500 different yeasts and lactic acid bacteria, and each and every sourdough has a unique consortium of combinations. Right. Some have a very vast combination, others have only 1 or 2 types or dominant types of yeasts and lactic acid.
So it's like the sourdough's fingerprint.
Yes.
It has its own unique fingerprint.
It's the idea, and it's like, so each and every sourdough in the library is unique in different ways, because the flour is different, the water that was used to create them was different, the microorganisms that thrive in there are different, and we don't know how to favorize one or another and make sure that this one is growing or that one is growing.
So how do you preserve it? How do you keep it the same? Or aren't you always changing it a little bit when you're adding water from a different place, or even if it's just exposed to the air?
So, well, there is many on social media. I often get, when I make a little movie about the library, often people say, your library, all the sourdoughs become the same.
Right.
They are all the same, because as soon as you open a jar in another place, it's taking the cultures from the air and so on. We don't believe that, okay? For the simple reason that in this jar, there's like, it's not even a pound, it's half a pound. Yeah, there is trillions and trillions and trillions of microorganisms living in there. In 1 gram, in this quantity, there is more life than humans on Earth. Okay, just in this. So
praise be.
You have to look at it like it's a city. If tomorrow we take the city of Austin and we would, with a big crane, get it out of the floor and drop it next to New York, How long would it take before the people from Austin call
Become
themselves
New Yorkers.
New Yorkers and vice versa?
Yeah.
It's not that easy. Once you have a healthy and a sourdough, when you maintain it in healthy conditions, it is hard to change. So what will happen over time if you neglect it a little bit? Your colonies get weaker and weaker. And if then you introduce new flour or another flour, you might change the life. What we do in the library is that once a year, the owners, they send us a bag of flour and we refresh every 2 months.
From the region.
Yeah, the flour that they are using in their bakery, their pizzeria, their school, or their home, we feed the sourdoughs with that flour every 2 months. So we keep them in airtight jars, so they are not contaminated by the environment. We take them out, we take a little piece of 20 grams, we add flour and water, the same proportions that they do in their place, and we do that 3 times with 6 hours in between, so to give the microorganisms that are in there the optimal conditions to grow, to multiply themselves, and to be able to be preserved for the next 2 months.
So there's a whole area of science and culinary focus on sourdough specifically.
If you would
It's a lot of work.
Yes, yes, yes. So there is, I don't know how many, but there's many universities in the world who are actually studying the impact of sourdough on the health benefits of bread.
Well, I was going to ask. Go
Why
ahead.
is sourdough bread better than regular yeasted bread?
And it is.
From the ongoing studies,
Yeah.
we see a clearly impact on a couple of things. First, we know that sourdough bread has a lower glycemic index. So what it does is that it reduces it gives you a better satiety. So when you eat it in the morning, you can go longer. You don't have that sugar spike. So that's already a positive impact. But then the most beautiful thing, there is 2 things. The first one is that we hear a lot about gluten. People say, oh no, gluten, you have to stay away from gluten. It's bad for you because we cannot digest it. The beauty of sourdough is that the lactic acid bacteria in the sourdough, they do digest the proteins or the gluten that you find in the bread. When you start making sourdough bread, you start reducing the gluten that you have developed during the mixing. They start to transform those, to convert them into amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of the human body. So therefore, sourdough bread is an amazing thing that we understand this mechanism and that we can explain to consumers that sourdough bread is okay and you should not be afraid of bread, and it can help you to avoid bloating, because we hear that sometimes people say, oh, when I eat bread, I have bloating, it's not digesting very well. With sourdough bread, you have that less. Now, we are still trying to put the finger on all the other mechanisms and show really by A plus B in scientific studies, and we should do some human intervention studies to confirm that. It's ongoing, it takes time, it requires money to do that. And last but not least, a grain. Humans, if we swallow a grain, what is going to happen? You swallow it and it will come out. We will see it coming out. Nothing is gonna happen. Although this grain is packed with nutrients, with carbs, there is proteins inside, there's minerals, there's vitamins, which are essential for a nutritious diet. Now, I often compare this grain to the cavern of Ali Baba. You know the story of Ali Baba? The cavern was packed with gold, was packed with diamonds, but you needed a code to get in. The code was, you remember?
Go ahead.
Sesame open.
Open sesame.
Open sesame. Open sesame. And then the code to crack or to open or to have access to the nutrients in the grain, there's 2 actually. You can germination or fermentation. And sourdough, it's all about fermentation. So when you allow these lactic acid bacteria to start digesting the flour, it has a positive impact. But also in a grain, there is what we call phytic acid. especially in whole grain bread, there is high amounts of phytic acid. Now, this phytic acid forms actually a barrier between our body and the grain, the nutrients in the grain. Now, during the fermentation, the lactic acid bacteria, they produce lactic acid and acetic acid, which tends to give the bread a little bit of sour taste, or very sour, depending on the bakery. Now, these sour are reducing the pH. There is also an enzyme present, naturally present in the grain, which is called phytase. Now, this phytase becomes very active and works optimal when the pH goes lower than 5.3. When you just mix flour and water together with the yeast and the salt without sourdough, you have a pH of 6.5, 6.3, which is too high to give the activity to that enzyme. And so there is a barrier between the nutrients and our body. But with the presence of sourdough, slowly during the long fermentation, the pH is going down, reaches 5.3, and the phytase starts to cut the phytic acid into smaller pieces, which are then not capable of preventing our body to absorb these nutrients. So in sourdough bread, we speak about a better digestibility, a lower GI to give you better satiety, and also a better bioavailability of the minerals and fibers that are present in the grain.
Wow. So sourdough is part of a long lineage of pickling or fermenting food that works in tandem with your microbiome, with all of the bacteria that's already in you, because you think that you chew it and then it digests, but it's actually all the bacteria that are helping as well within your...
It's pre-digestion.
Yeah, so this helps in advance.
Yes.
So you're breaking into the nutrients, you're getting that gold, and you're also allowing your body to digest it more easily. Does it do anything for preservation?
Yes.
Because I know for pickling it does.
Well, when you make a sourdough bread, you lower the pH of the final bread. By lowering the pH, you inhibit the mold growth. So your product, if your bread, will not start to get moldy after 2 or 3 days. So in a natural way, it helps to give your bread a longer shelf life.
So somebody at home, like a traditional mom who had her sourdough, her special sourdough that she was going to ultimately bequeath in the wedding, she would keep it on the counter, or where would she keep it?
There is different methods. We see over the years, we have different stories and different proof of what they were doing. If in Italy, for example, I have a small museum in Belgium where I have a jar. It's a ceramic jar, and there is written lievito madre, which is the Italian word for the mother dough, for the sourdough. That was like one of the most important things in a household. So it was kept in a jar. In 2018, I went on a quest for sourdough to follow the Klondike Gold Rush Trail, because that's an amazing history in sourdough. It's amazing how these stampeders were going from Seattle to Dawson City, and they all had a sourdough that they were carrying in a bag around their neck. But then when I landed in Juneau, there was an exhibition in the airport of all these little sourdough jars that the people in Alaska are still using today, and they were decorated with eagles, with bears, in wood. So it's kept in little jars. Others, I was once in Greece to discover how they were making bread there, and then there was an old priest in the village, and he said, what we did in the past was they have this wooden dough trough where they put in the flour and then the water and the butter dough. And at the end of when the baking was finished, they would fill it up with new flour, and they would just leave a piece of the old dough into this flour, cover it up.
The mother gives birth to the rest,
yes.
A bigger portion.
So they were not keeping it in a jar, but they were just scraping the leftovers of the dough out of that mixing bowl, covering it with flour.
And then more would come, wow.
Yes.
So each mother that you have in the library has a unique biologic footprint, and then it also has a different heritage, right? I mean, so how do you determine that a sourdough is worthy of the library?
Okay.
And besides its unique footprint from the bacteria standpoint, What about its historic relevance?
Yes. So I have this website called thequestforsourdough.com. There, people, whoever they are and wherever they are, they can register their mother. Online, we ask them, what's the name? When was it created? What's the origin? What kind of flour do you use? What other ingredients do you use? So we try to document. We ask to upload a couple of pictures so we see how it looks like. They have to make the flavor profile and the way it tastes. They have to describe that. And based on that information, we make a kind of selection. So that is my database in order to see which sourdough comes in. But the very first thing we ask ourselves is the sourdough or the mother dough coming from a spontaneous fermentation? In Germany, if you go to Germany and you go into a bakery, you will find sourdough bread. But already for more than 100 years, in Germany, they use a starter culture. So it's a commercial culture that you buy and which is, all bakers use the same, and they just use it because they look at the sourdough as a very technical product to acidify the dough, especially when they make rye bread. When you make rye bread, you need to acidify the dough in order to make it sliceable after baking and to get a proper bake out of it. So it's a very technical way to approach. Well, these sourdoughs that are made from a commercial starter culture, they do not interest us because we know what's in that culture and it doesn't contribute to the biodiversity of sourdough. So for us, spontaneous fermentation is the most important thing. And then we look at what kind of flour is used. Where does it come from? And each parameter gets another weight depending what we have already in the library. I give an example. We have 40 mothers from Italy because we started our project with Marco Gobetti, Italian professor, and we did the first study before we had the idea of creating a library. We said, let's find out a little bit about the diversity of sourdough in Italy. So we collected 37 mothers in Italy, Sicily, and Sardinia. And we discovered 400 different microorganisms. We said, wow, this is crazy. But if tomorrow an Italian baker comes to me and he says, "Ma Karl, I have a sourdough for you," I will say, well, it depends. If it's a buckwheat sourdough, maybe you have a higher chance than if it's just the wheat, because we have already like 37 wheat sourdoughs, soft wheat and durum wheat. But if tomorrow someone from Costa Rica or from Panama is coming, we have nothing from those countries. So the chances are higher for them to come in with a wheat sourdough than an Italian now with a wheat sourdough. So we evaluate with a couple of people to see, okay, what are we the next 10 months? What would we like to do? Like just before COVID, we launched a campaign because we wanted to have whole wheat sourdoughs.
Did you start the sourdough craze during COVID? Everybody was making sourdough.
Oh no, we
COVID.
started, well, on 18 October, we celebrate the 10 years of the Sourdough Library.
You were there
We started, when I entered in the company, it was 1994, and that's when I encountered my very first sourdough, and it was a sourdough that a colleague of mine got from San Francisco to Belgium in order to study San Francisco sourdough. That was for me the very first sourdough I saw in my life was one from San Francisco. So we go way back in time. The very first time we started to talk about sourdough was in 1984, when the owner of the company, because Puratos is a family company, when he got the requests from a big hamburger manufacturer that we all know, and they asked if it was possible to offer them a solution to increase the flavor in their buns. And so Mr. Van Bel is a kind of a visionary. He said, we have to do something with sourdough. So he hired a PhD student. That was the guy who went to San Francisco to study the commercial feasibility of producing sourdough and selling it as an ingredient to our customers. And so in '94, we opened the doors. He took the sourdough, went to the customer who was actually asking for it, and then they said, oh, we're not interested anymore. And little by little, customers started to use it. Retailers started to promote it on the packaging, that it's with sourdough inside. And as such, little by little, the awareness of sourdough was rising. But the most amazing thing, well, for me, And I don't dare to say it, but COVID was like a blessing because suddenly everybody started to Google. In 2020, the fifth Google search word was sourdough. Fifth. Yeah. First was COVID, I think then was sex or porn or something like that. But on the fifth place, sourdough. I was contacted by the New York Times, by radio stations in Australia, in New Zealand, in Belgium, from all over the world. I was doing sometimes lectures at 2 o'clock in the morning with the university in Tasmania, and then in the afternoon with people in the US. It was the most amazing time because the library was so in the spotlight.
So were you able to find a number of sourdoughs for the library in that period?
Yes.
So how hard is it to find new sourdoughs, and what is what do you estimate how many sourdoughs are out there unyet discovered?
Okay, on the website we have more than 2,800 sourdoughs registered.
2,800.
But that's nothing,
right.
eh? That's nothing
right.
Because we don't put out big advertisement campaigns or whatsoever.
Word of mouth.
I'm the owner of a Facebook group called Perfect Sourdough, where there is 126,000 people. I guess they all have sourdough, but they don't register their sourdough on the website yet. So we are working on that. So I don't know how many sourdoughs there are in the world. I know that in the library we have 145. Often I get the question, yeah, what will you do when your library is full?
Full? What's full?
If you go to a library, you see the books that they have at the time, but the attic is full, the basement is full of books, and you can make them rotate. We can do the same in the library, or I can just use smaller jars. Now there is like 3 per shelf, I can put 15 per shelf. Right. So I can have physically stored 1,000 sourdoughs. So I still have a long way to go, because per year we have a budget to get 20 to 24 new sourdoughs analyzed.
Right. And so you're also having to take care of them, right? Every day you have to add water. How often do you add water in
Every
flour?
2 months. So every 2 months, all of them. So what I do is every month I feed half of them. So every month on a Tuesday morning, I take the sourdoughs out. We have these little jam jars that we use. There goes 20 grams.
And you have to use the same flour?
Yes.
For that particular...
Yes.
So it's a lot of organization.
Beside the library, which, okay, it's 145, but I have more than 145 buckets of flour, because some sourdoughs, there is one here from the US, it contains 6 different flours. Right. And then I have one from France, it's with 3 flours. So beside a collection of sourdoughs, I also have a big collection of all these flours.
Gargantuan task.
So the management of that is, I always have 1 or 2 helpers. It's people from internally, from within the company. I have a lot of people who say, oh, I would like to come and feed the sourdoughs with you. But I also use that opportunity to invite journalists. Whenever I get a request from a journalist, I say, well, look, you can come, but if you want, this is what I offer. It's 2 days. You have to stick with me. We do 2 hours in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, and then the next day, another 2 hours to feed them 3 times, put them back in the jar.
And are you worried about the type of water, or are you?
The water we use, where the library is located, like 20 minutes driving from the city of Spa. The spa, the spa, the wellness things, is coming from the city of Spa.
Oh, Spa, that's called Spa.
Spa.
Oh.
The city is Spa.
Perfect.
So the water is there, so what we get, I always laugh, I say, we have the Spa from the tap. But it is amazing water that we have there. But we've conducted a study with another professor in Italy, his name is Fabio Minervi, from the University of Bari, to see the influence of water on the creation of a sourdough. So he took 6 types of water, the same flour, same lab, in a lab environment, same timings, he followed everything the same, but he made with 6 types of water the sourdough. They had 6 different sourdoughs with a different consortium of microorganisms. And then they started to feed these 6 sourdoughs with different waters. And they saw that after 10 days, nothing changed. So his conclusion when he presented it There is every 3 years a symposium where all these scientists come together and to talk about sourdough. And he said, you know, from the water, it's a bit strange. The mother we know, from the mother, the sourdough itself we consider as the mother because you are sure. The water, it's like the father. You are never sure.
Oh!
So it was a bit of a funny approach, but to say that once the sourdough, to create the sourdough, the water is important and will vary depending on the qualities of the water. But once the sourdough has become a stable consortium, the city with the surrounded walls and a good community, is difficult to change it. You can use different waters, it's not going to change.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you have brought us a number, five
mothers. Yes.
All the way from Belgium. These are from the library.
These are coming from the library.
Okay, so very special. And are you going to bake some bread from these mothers? This is just...
We will bake some breads inspired on this one.
Okay.
This is a sourdough that we collected in 2003. And this is a sourdough that was already described 37 BC. There was a Roman poet called Horatio.
So, go ahead. This is not from that time, but it's been described. Okay.
We cannot carbon date sourdough. So I cannot tell you how old it is. This could be like 50 years old, it could be 150 years old, it could be 300 years old.
Right, so you're just dating it based on like just storytelling, based on verbal
Although,
analysis.
By storing these in the library, we know exactly when we collected this one. I have to go look in the file and it will be like the 21st of July, 2003. We know. Now they are documented and we know exactly how old they are already. But we found this book of Horatio, it's the Satires, and he was describing a travel from Bari to Torino in Italy. And he has in one chapter, he says, if you are in Altamura or in the region of Apulia, which is, if you look at the map of Italy, it's like a boot in the heel, that part. If you are in Apulia, take bread for your onwards journey because it's probably the best bread in the Roman Empire. He said the world, but it's okay. He didn't know outside of the Roman Empire. 37 BC. So we went to Altamura, which is today a city which describes itself as La Città del Pane, the city of bread. They have a DOP denomination. It's like a Denominazione Originale Protettata, like they do with the wine.
Certification
like
of sorts.
So it's one of the only breads in the world who has that. And the bread has a very nice flavor and taste. It's made with durum wheat flour. So we went to Altamura, and it was long before we had the idea of creating a library. It was pure commercially. We bought a sourdough. We had it analyzed with our partner, Gobetti, and we found lactic acid bacteria and yeast. We said, ooh, these are different than what we are doing in our factory. So let's try to replicate this unique flavor. And so we created a product that I brought and that Kayla will use to make some ciabatta and some focaccia. So then you will taste the spirit. I always say when you open the bag, you unleash the spirit of Altamura in your bakery. So we will bake with those.